Hello, guys. Thank you for being here. Thank you, Pedro, Lucas, Afonso, Leon.
By the way, I'm not member of the FPD management committee together with Pedro. I'm disciplinary panel member of ESIC.
Okay.
Eventually, but I would love to. I'm open to.
That's okay.
In case you want to consider, but so far I'm not.
I'm sorry.
No.
Sorry. Okay, guys. So I was just talking about the traditional sports and recognition and Olympism and all the standards we can create, right? So, in your point of view, the legacy we are going to give, we are going to take from the traditional sports and maybe try to apply some of the points to the esports. Is that possible in any way? If it is possible, and how can we start doing that? Please, Pedro.
Is it working? Yeah. So, again, good afternoon. Thank you very much for having me again. So there are, in fact, a lot of similarities, and starting by the fact that we're talking about electronic sports, which is a sport. So obviously there's loads of similarities and connection points with traditional sports, as we call it. The main one that I think, or the starting point where I think we should look at in the sense of our discussion here these couple of days of national federations and how to structure, I don't really like to use the word regulate much, but like the structure things going forward on a local level and then an international level. There's a couple of things that I think we need to take into account. So the first one is we all have witnessed that a number of traditional sports entities, whether they are clubs, teams, or brands that work usually in esports, or in sports, sorry, they have moved, so they've invested in esports in the last few years. But the main, I have followed this process very closely, and especially because, especially in Europe, I've literally been talking to most of the major football clubs in Europe, pretty much all of the top 50, 60 football clubs. I had the pleasure of meeting them, a lot of them in person, and talking to them about their, esports strategy, how they would go into esports, what esports would mean to them. And the thing that they all seemed to have in common as a worry was that they didn't see a sort of a regulatory body or someone that could, they saw everything kind of scattered around the place. Mm-hmm. And they didn't see how could things, so they looked at esports and they couldn't see what they see in football, which is like a structure, order, general rules for everyone, and which is somewhat possible to do in esports, but at the same time a little bit impossible, because you cannot compare football with esports. You can compare loads of sports with esports. You can compare basketball and football and handball, like the Olympics, with esports, something like that, right? Because there's a multitude of sports inside esports. There's League of Legends, Counter-Strike, Call of Duty, whatever, Clash Royale. And each of these individual sports inside esports have their own idiosyncrasies, just similarly has traditional sports. So that was their main worry. They were like, I don't understand, I don't get it. Who is in charge? And when most of the clubs realized that who was in charge was the publishers, because we're talking about private IP, they were like, I can't somehow control this like I do in football, right? Because football clubs do control the football ecosystem. Right, so the second that was the first problem, and then, but then the second thing that I think we need to look into is that from a structuring point of view and from a legacy point of view, there is something. I mean, there is something from the traditional sports legacy that we should take into account in esports, and we should learn from it. If we look back 100 years ago from today, if we look at the early 1900s. What was going on with football was very similar to what is going on with esports right now. There was a bunch of football clubs like there's a bunch of teams. And then at some point, someone said, okay, look, my club, I want to play with someone, so I'm just going to organize a tournament. But then it felt a little bit odd that, let's say, FC Barcelona, because we're here in Barcelona, organizes a tournament and then they win it. And then people will go like, yeah, it's a little bit, maybe a little bit dodgy. So then clubs felt the need, people in charge of clubs felt the need to create an independent body that was above all suspicion, and to organize these competitions. And that's what usually happened with local associations, like with the Catalonia Football Association, something like that. And those eventually merged into national associations, because then they felt, these regional associations felt that they need to have one body to speak with the government and so on. And then these national associations formed the international associations. And that's more or less what's happening right now with esports. So we had loads of teams, and then we had some people, in parallel, some companies doing competitions like ESL and so on. And that moved on to local associations. I kind of think we skipped the regional part because esports doesn't lend itself to regional things. It's not as local, it's more online and stuff. But then so it went straight to national associations and federations, and that led into international associations, and that's where we are at the moment.
Yeah, I think I agree with a lot that was said by Pedro. Just looking at, whenever we talk about sports and what esports can learn from traditional sports, I always ask the question, what sports and what esports, right? Because there's a lot of different sports, a lot of different esports, a lot of different game titles, and you cannot apply something one-to-one from the traditional world to the esports world, because there's a lot of very special cases, and I think that's always important to keep in mind, that there's not one a solution that fits everything, right? That we have to look at the individual sports. And then also what I think esports is a very specific kind of area, and it's something that is between maybe traditional sports and entertainment, and and I feel that we are sort of trying very hard to apply things that have somehow worked in traditional sports. Some things have also not worked to the esports landscape, which came to be in a very different way than traditional sports, which really grew from a grassroots level upwards. And esports is a very different phenomenon that started on a global level, and now we're trying to structure it later on. So so maybe one aspect to discuss is, why do we always focus on traditional sports as the only role model? I mean, I think there's things we can learn from that, but then there are also a lot of aspects where we should probably look into entertainment or into other areas where there's stuff that is relevant today, and also just looking at the main actors in sports and traditional and esports. You do have players, teams, and tournament organizers similar to what you have in sports, but the role of publishers does not exist in sports, right? So we also cannot take a model that works in the traditional world and just apply it to esports, because it is an industry that is different with different actors. So I think we should focus on best practices that we can take from different areas and try to figure a good model for esports, but not just apply something that exists in a traditional sports world to esports and think that will solve all our issues.
Sure. Maybe create some new model to regulate it and to operate it. And what about you, Afonso?
I fully agree with Lucas' point, and in fact, I do think that this is the way the title of the presentation is properly put forward. You know what I mean, in terms of that. Thank God, like we have already went months, and I would say a couple of years ago, like already over there whether esports are a sport or not. Already we're making a clear distinction in between one and the other for mainly like organic reasons, which is, as my dear colleagues in the panel have already mentioned, the presence of the publisher, which is absolutely everything, and we're already discussing on what can we get, which is good from esports, from sports. So getting into that question, what is good and what is wrong?
Sure.
What is wrong, we can, for instance, in my view, is how late sports tackled issues related with integrity. For instance, how to tackle doping, how late illegal betting was being tackled, corruption among officials. Why? Because it just was tackled whenever it exploded all over the sports face, if I may say, and then it was all over the media, and they're affected like all the clubs, all the investors, and it was already like a huge drama. In esports, we see that despite it's true that it may be like a slightly, in terms of professionalization or more recent one, it's something that has been tackled from the very beginning, from the very early start through ESIC. That thankfully I think all of us know about it. That like esports already shown as an industry its maturity in order to give itself with self-regulation. That is something that state didn't give it to itself to tackle all these major points, certain points in which there was a common consent. And then something that can be good also to be gotten from traditional sports, the structure of a federation. I don't know. Like in the previous panel with our dear moderator and Romain, and Stefan, and Fernando and Ana, this was also like how to reach. Because in fact, Romain himself is president of the French FA, no? But we also know how is the structure and regulation in France, how much tight is everything in terms of structure and so on. Here we have much more informalism, no? So we have to take the advantage out of it. And also eventually, why not the federation structure? But running away from the concept of traditional sport. Federation not in terms of sports federation, but in terms of having a common institution in which gathering the different stakeholders. It's true that esports, because of its own nature, it means that will be automatically given to publishers maybe 90% of the votes or 80% of the votes, I don't know, which is something that doesn't happen in sports.
You just said the mission and the plains of Huesco.
Yeah.
That's it, because it's something new. You cannot follow the standards of the old point of view of federation. Mm-hmm. You're right. You're quite right.
And at the end of the day, is a table where everybody will be sitting together. And I think this is something that does exist in sport, which we don't have yet in esport, which is having like a common interlocutor. I don't know in English.
Yeah.
Like, somebody to be addressed by whom? By external parties that eventually want to sit down, and they cannot find that single body or person or entity. And I think that's good. Running away from the fragmentation, that was something that was being said yesterday in the panel, I think by yourself. Yep. And running away from the fragmentation is something that has been obtained in sport, and from which I think in eSport we still have to learn.
That's wonderful. So let's take some best practice. Let me give you an example, and you give me back what you think. That would be interesting. Because we just mentioned it, that we have a lot of different esports inside esports. But what about the esports? Period. And then you have a lot of modes. MOBA, first-person shooter, and so
Genders.
on. And then we have the platforms. So just like in athleticism, you have athleticism, but you have racing, you have jumping, you have a lot of things. Would that make sense to create this parallel?
I think so. And that's something that we're actually doing on the Portuguese Esports Federation. So we published a document with the national strategy for esports, right? And that's part of the requirements that we need to present to the government and to explain to them, because a lot of people in government understand esports, but the vast majority doesn't. So we published this document that explains exactly this. So there's what is esports? So we need to educate the general population, like I mentioned yesterday, and the politicians. And so we need to explain to them, okay, so these are different sports. Just imagine that we have different genders, which will be athletics, basketball, swimming, gymnastics, and for instance, baseball or basketball, it's just this sport, or football. But then gymnastics or athletics, then there's a multitude of modes inside it, of competitive modes, right? So, and this is what we're talking about. So you have MOBAs, and then you have League of Legends, Dota, and then you have collectible card games. You have
real-time strategy.
Exactly. And so we've decided to break the structure of the federation into what we call modalities or game modes.
We did that in Brazil. It's the same.
And then inside that, there can be competitions for different game titles, right? But the point we're trying to get at is we're trying to explain we're trying to explain to people that there's a multitude of things of different game modes and different sports inside this placeholder, this box called esports, that can be all structured in a similar way, although they have their own individualities or idiosyncrasies, but then they can be structured more or less in the same way. There is one thing that I will actually like to mention about what Alfonso was saying. Sorry, just to go back a little bit, because it then ties into what I wanted to say. So with regards to the structure of the federations and how they should be organized, it is normal that in these earlier stages of esports, a lot of the people that are part of these intentionally governing bodies are people who have a somewhat conflict of interest because they own companies or teams, and then they also are part of the managing bodies or board of directors of some of these. And this, I think, is something that we've somehow learned from traditional sports of how not to do it, because I don't think it's wrong to have in the board of management of a national federation someone that is also the owner of a team. I don't think that's wrong. I mean, there's no problem, in my opinion, of having conflict of interest. What I think it's important to have is full transparency about that conflict of interest. So if everyone knows from the start, from the ground up, that this person is also working there, and everyone knows about it, then tendentially there will be no risk situations where the conflict of interest can be activated. The problem that we had in football, and this is why I think we've learned better, because I think there's transparency in esports. In football, for instance, there was no transparency. Loads of people were presidents of clubs, and then they had their hand under the table, or they had, right?
Yes,
so this is wrong. This is trying to manipulate stuff. I don't think that really happens in esports. I haven't seen major corruption scandals in esports so far, and we're not talking. Yes, we're talking about a young sport, but we're talking about a 20-year-old sport. Okay, so it's 20-year-olds, and we don't remember one major corruption scandal like we've seen the last 5 years in football. So, and it's not because there's not as much money in esports as there is in football, because there's loads of money in majors and so on. But there's no major corruption scandals.
But again, this is a perfect example where this is an area where we should not orientate ourselves towards traditional sports.
Traditional sports.
Looking at compliance,
that's what I'm
ethics.
saying. We're doing it right.
Exactly, compliance, ethics, integrity, all these things. Looking at FIFA and the IOC over the last,
10 years, to say the least,
even longer. This is not something that we want to become in esports, right?
No.
But this has to do again with the general business practice, right? We have to look at basic compliance standards, basic code of conducts that are, very prominent and exist in all kinds of industries. And this is not something where we have to look into football, but look into what maybe some of the multinational companies do.
Yeah. What Google does, what Microsoft
exactly.
does.
Those should be the ones that we look into. And I think that is really key, right? That we are in a position, luckily, that it's still an industry that is growing, where there's not a lot of regulation, but that exactly is an advantage that allows us to sort of cherry pick or pick and choose which things we want to take over from different industries or areas. And there's certain things that we can learn from traditional sports, for sure, but I think there's also a lot of things that we shouldn't take over from traditional sports, and we should look into other areas. And at the same time, maybe to also introduce that discussion, I think there's traditional sports is also jealous of a lot of things that esports already has that they don't have. So I think it's really important to keep an open mind and to consider what best practices are out there, but not just with a focus on traditional sports once again.
You guys are making me sad, and I'm going to be depressed. There's somehow there's something good from the traditional sports that, of course, we have to apply. And so I will ask each one of you, give me one example from the traditional sport that we can use within the electronic sports.
I mean, I can start. I think when it comes to sort of how competitions are run and structured, there you can really look at for example, at FIFA or UEFA, when what they do with the Champions League. If you compare that with Counter-Strike, which is a super fragmented system where you have hundreds of tournaments, different tournament organizers, and if you're not a hardcore fan, you don't understand who's playing who, there's always something on Twitch, and you cannot monetize or commercialize a product successfully if there's no exclusivity whatsoever. If you can always turn on Twitch and there's something going on, and then it will be very hard to create a product that you can also monetize in a way that, for example, the Champions League has done in football. So I think there we have a lot to learn.
That's a good thing. That's wonderful.
Yeah, I think
I'm more happier now.
Good.
I'm breathing. So what about the legal side? What about you?
Precisely, the legal side is one. Well, obviously, like the Champions League example is fantastic insofar as to show how to monetize any competition, no? Which I think should be like a little bit the objective also here, because it's the very way that has given means to actually for football clubs to survive and keep on going and develop themselves and increase. So should be the way of looking into that, but also the whole regulatory framework that is around it, which is not only the incomes that come from the Champions League, but also the financial fair play regulations that make that all clubs that are eventually candidates to participate in the Champions League or in the UEFA Europa League have to have like certain incomes, you know what I mean, like certain control over what they can spend and what they cannot, in order to avoid inflation in the market, which is something that eventually we can see now in certain competitions in esports, and then all together with transfer regulations, all together with licensing, which is something that Stephen was putting forward together with ESIC, also to provide a regulatory framework for transfers that I already mentioned, and as a whole, like trying to establish more certainty, not only for the people inside, obviously, but also from the people outside. I don't know who in the panel before was saying that, I think it was Romain, who said that whenever I had an investor coming in, he looked at the contracts, he was like, okay, like this is highly uncertain, because eventually the player can leave. And how am I going to invest on long term if I don't know if you're going to be able to retain your assets? So in the end, like legal framework, that's what it gives. Certainty for all stakeholders. And particularly in this case, it seemed like to the benefit of the players, but we should not forget the players. Another thing that is good from traditional sports is the fact that, for instance, in football or in basketball, they have a strong players' union, which is something very important and worldwide.
So I'm getting happier and almost paying whiskey to everybody.
Yeah.
It's up to
I'll take you up on that. But one major thing that I think is also extremely important that we need, definitely, we esports people definitely need to look at into sports brands is no one more, especially football and the American sports brands, no one knows better in this world how to build a really strong brand than these sports brands. Okay, we have really strong brands in a multitude of areas and industries, but like the effort and the way that a brand like Real Madrid, FC Barcelona, Manchester United, brands, just to mention the three
become
biggest.
a franchise.
The way these brands were built and communicated to their audience, and they're worked on a daily basis, on a minute basis, 24 hours a day, this is something that we could also learn in esports. Is sort of maturity, this sort of marketing work, this sort of communication work is something that I definitely have advocated in the past 4 years that esports teams need to look into how clubs communicate with their audience, with their fans, because this is something good. However, there is one specific thing. There is the reverse side. So the specific communication we have in esports is not usually applied. It doesn't really match with the communication that you need to do to a football fan. However, there's I'm more talking about the techniques, about the way, the professionalism that the clubs put into this, and the work, the framework they have, the marketing framework they have, which definitely allows them. Probably let me put it this way, probably esports teams communicate better with their fans and they have a closer relationship, but football fans have it more structured, or football clubs have it more structured and have it done, do it in an extensive way that keep their fans always up to date with everything that is going on, and they, we could
More engaged.
Yeah, we probably engage better with our fans in esports, but they engage more.
Yeah.
They are engaging all the time. And this is something that, tying into what Lucas was saying about how to monetize a product, it's extremely important, because the teams, the esports teams that have understood this problem in the last 5 or 10 years are the ones that are doing better right now.
Yeah. No, I think if you look at some of the team brands, then you do see that there's a lot of value attached to the big brands, to the Cloud9s, to the Nips, to the Face of the world. But and I think there is definitely potential to build up on that, and you also have to look at it on a timeline, right? Like Real Madrid, Barcelona, these clubs are 100 years old. They had a lot of
120 or so.
120
That's
years
what
old.
I'm saying.
They had a lot of time to build upon that, and if you look at sort of the brand recognition and power that some of these big esports teams already have, I think we're definitely going in the right direction.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that what these teams are often struggling with is, again, more general business practice issues or experiences.
Yes.
that these guys are now have to look into or improve, right? They oftentimes they're founded, sort of by passionate players, and it's a small startup, and now it develops, and there's a professionalization that has to happen there in all levels of business, in finance, and I think legal compliance, that is extremely important, marketing, sales, on all levels. But I have a feeling that at least these bigger brands that do a good job, that the brands are already super powerful and will only continue to become more present.
And I think that, sorry if I may interrupt, and I think this is precisely like one of the things also to be learned from traditional sports, which is the thing not to be learned from, which is something that maybe we didn't have yet time to do so, which is sort of, I wouldn't say educate, but get used the fan base to consume in sports. You know what I mean? Because that's normal. You were saying it, Madrid, I think it's 110 years old.
More.
So as of 90 years or so, or 80 years, fans from Real Madrid are used to buy the shirt of Real Madrid.
Yeah.
So maybe as of the 80s to buy maybe the full training kit, and then something else, and then something else.
Yeah.
And that's something that esports has to go through, and also like get used all its fan base to consume in all aspects. Just like, but it's not something maybe to be learned from, because it's something that simply we didn't have time yet to go through.
And I think there's also an important thing to mention, which is, and it ties into what Alfonso was saying earlier, and Lucas as well, when he mentioned the Champions League, which is the sports clubs. And again, I'm talking a little bit more about the football clubs, because that's where most of my experience resides. Like, if you look back at some of the most powerful leagues that exist right now, they have been building this brand for the last 40 years. Okay, and esports is 20 years old. So they have been here before, and in the last 40 years they have changed loads of things, and now they're and to build what the brands that exist right now. So we need to wait, as Alfonso was saying, a little bit until we actually get it there as well. Although we are much more dynamic than esports is much more dynamic than most traditional sports, so we'll probably just catch up. However, I would like to give one example of what I'm saying. So I don't know if the people here remember, many of you are probably too young to remember that, but I do distinctively remember that in the 80s, the Premier League was really bad. They were struggling a lot. And especially when they had problems like the massive issue with Liverpool, where a lot of people died in Hyde Park and they got banned for loads of years for participating in the European competitions. Like the Premier League as a product did not sell. No one cared about it, okay? People saw it on the television, but it was not really the major. So rugby was probably the #1 sport in the UK, or at least a very close fight with football. And then someone at the English Premier League said, okay, we have to fix this somehow. And they've done loads of changes. Many of them had to do with formation and training players from younger ages and educate them from younger ages, educate the audience, make sure that all kinds of security regulations were in place and so on and so on. But what I think was the most notable change was at some point in time, someone in the Premier League said, we are going to create an entertainment product here. Okay, and we're going to sell the rights, the broadcast rights of this entertainment product to Sky. I think it was at the time, it was already Sky. And then this resulted, and tying into what Alfonso was saying, this resulted in a massive uproar from the English audience. They were like, what? We're used to seeing the games on the BBC for free, and now we have to pay Sky to see the games on? No, we don't want this. This is like massive uproar. Everyone was shouting, making all kinds of noises and discussions about this. But they kept on doing it. And right now, nowadays, no one even complains. It's like it's a given. If you want to see the Premier League, you have to have Sky, or Sky Sports, or you have to buy any other TV package. Right now in esports, we don't have this. So esports is free. You go to Twitch and all content is free. But and I've said this in other panels, and it's a little bit debatable, and many people don't agree with me. I think this is about to change in esports, and it's probably not going to take as long as many people think. And I think of this because we've all seen in the last few years that major media groups are making their move into esports. We just have to think about the Media Times Group buying 100% of DreamHack, and I think it was 84% of ESL. So, which are the two biggest, event organizers in the world. What does that mean exactly? We don't know for sure, but my opinion, my suspicion, which I don't think it's a bad thing, is that at some point in time, this content from ESL and DreamHack, and eventually from other tournament organizers, will be behind the pay gate. And just like what happened in football, all esports fans are going to be in a massive uproar. Oh my God, no, the content should be free, blah, 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 blah. But in 5 years after that, or 10 years after that, everyone will just pay-per-view. Everyone will just consume on demand like they do with Netflix, with Spotify, and every other single entertainment product that we have. So and I think esports needs to get into there, to the point of Lucas, need to get into there so that we also have that structure that you were talking about, and that revenue also feeds into clubs.
But, I've seen two things happening. I've been in another event called the SET Expo. Mm-hmm. It's about broadcasting and TVs, and we discussed in my panel how the broadcasting meets the streaming, and some of the great broadcasting TV channels in America, they are trying to put that content inside the grid, but it is impossible. It's just like to try to put tennis in the primary time. So they are competing very strong against or side by side with the streaming like Twitch and YouTube, because these channels, they are there. I mean, I watch whenever I want. I just sit there and access the channel. That would be one challenge, and that would be something to learn from the legacy. The other aspects...
But that's because live streaming does not fit the traditional
No.
TV broadcast
Yeah.
models.
But they are
But
trying.
that's not the problem with esports. That's the problem with the traditional
Yes.
TV broadcast
The
models.
TVs, the great broadcasting, they are trying to do that.
That's their problem.
But on,
That's
the
not
on,
esports
on the
problem.
other hand, it's probably also esports' responsibility for creating formats and products that work on linear
Yes.
TV.
Exactly.
Yes.
Because the thing is also, we keep focusing on Twitch and YouTube and Facebook streams, whatever, which is certainly very interesting and fits sort of the esports model and the digital world. But we keep forgetting about linear TV
Sure.
and sort of creating formats for that, because this is still where the money is today. And I
Or
think
will it be there tomorrow? That's the question.
the question is if that. I totally agree with your assessment that this will shift and this will move, and I think also we will have some sort of pay models in the future in esports, but at the moment it's not the case. So do we want to wait for it for
But-
10 years till
but
it
that's-
comes, or
that's-
we create models? So
But
that
that's
we-
the question I would like to ask, because right now I have 3 children, and 2 of them, one is 18 years old, and I have a daughter who is 14. My older son does not watch TV, and I don't remember the last time he has actually watched television, linear television. He does have his own Netflix account, and he has Spotify,
Let me give you
but he does not watch TV. My daughter never, ever watches TV. She spends all her time in Instagram, YouTube, and that's it.
But Pedro, let me give you a question back. Okay, you said that you were talking about the audience and the TV, and probably esports is going to be sold. But the guys
You're going to be what? Sorry.
sell. I mean,
Sold.
packets. But
Yeah, like on linear TV.
but the guys buying to watch football, they are not the same guys willing to pay anything on the internet, because the audience is completely different.
Exactly. So that's
Right.
what I
So
was talking about. So
that's a
how
little bit
how does the
difficult
TV? So right now, what I've been seeing is that the linear TV broadcasters, they want to tap into the esports audience. Right? Because why? Because in my opinion, the esports audience, which is pretty much the vast majority of everyone in digital generations, like everyone that was born after 1995, does not know any other reality. Most of them, especially Generation Z, they don't know any other reality in a world. They don't even know a world where smartphones did not exist. Like I always tell this story. I was talking to my kids the other day. My daughter, she's now 14, but she was 10 at the time, so this was 4 years ago. And I told her, when I was your age, there was no internet. And my daughter replied, "What you mean there was no internet? You didn't have a signal?" No. Then I tried to explain to her that the concept of 2 computers connected in a network did not exist in 1986. It did not exist. I mean, it existed, but no one knew about it. Right? So only in 1990, it started paying up. And mobile. The first time I saw a mobile phone, it was a satellite phone. It was a phone connected to a bag, and this was 1994. Okay, and so people. Generation Z, people who were born after the 2000s, they don't know any reality where smartphones did not exist. They don't know a reality where YouTube does not exist, so or even Instagram. So these are the people that in 20 years' time, 10 years' time, 20 years' time, they are going to be the decision makers of companies. They are going to be the purchase decision makers of their own households. So will they buy a TV package?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you're now sort of talking about very traditional linear TV, saying, something that is programmed from 9 to 10 on a Tuesday night. But all of these big media companies, they're also creating streaming platforms, creating offerings for the, digital natives. And I think that's something where esports totally fits them. And, and I think it's also sort of our responsibility in the industries to take them by the hand and show them, what is possible, what kind of content you can create.
We need to work with them,
and work with them, right? Incorporate them and just.
I mean, I don't think they need to be excluded.
Exactly.
I'm not saying that. They need to be included. I agree with you. What I'm saying is that they want to tap into this audience because they see that these are the people who are going to be making decisions of buying things in the future. The thing is, they need to adjust their models. And we do, and I do agree with you, we have a responsibility of telling them, okay, so this is what our audience likes. Let's talk about how you change your models
and how we can adjust also